What's up, everyone? Kevin here from Skywatcher. Welcome to another episode of the What's Up Webcast. We do this every Friday, 10 a.m. Pacific, right here at the Skywatcher USA YouTube channel. We cover everything from what's up in the nighttime sky to equipment to helpful tips and tricks. And, of course, at the end of the month, we have a special guest who shares their specialty. I completely lost my rhythm there. Anyway, we have a special guest on at the end of the month. You guys have been here long enough. This is like our 207th episode or something like that. So it is the end of the month. It's the end of May. This is May 31st of 2024. No idea where the year is going by, but it's flying by. So today we've got a good friend of ours, John Davis. We're going to bring him on in a little bit. If you like what you see here on the What's Up Webcast, please go ahead and leave a like or subscribe to the channel. That lets us know we're doing a good job. You can always go over to skywatcher.threadless.com and check out our swag. All kinds of cool stuff is hanging out over there. We're always adding new stuff. Real quick announcement. Next week, the What's Up for the month will be pre-recorded as I will be out. I'm heading to the Grand Canyon Star Party tomorrow. So if you'll be up there, I will be up there for the next 6 nights. So stop by and say hi. And our friend Vic Maris from Stellar View is actually coming up on Monday night and staying for a few nights as well. So stop by. If you're on the South Rim, say hi. Take a look at the beautiful skies up there and the big scopes that we're bringing out, and we'll have a good time. So without further ado, let's get started. And good morning, John. How are you?
Hey, doing good. How are you doing, Kevin?
Pretty good. Thanks for coming on. I know we've been chatting about this episode for a while now, a little on and off kind of thing. So,
yeah, well, thanks for having me.
of course. So for those of you who might not be familiar with John, John is an animator. He is an astrophotographer. He's a musician. He's just a crafty person all together. He does some really nice astrophotography work. He's probably most well known for his animation work. Some of you might be familiar with Jimmy Neutron and The Ant Bully. Those are probably his 2 big films. I think one time you actually joked that Jimmy Neutron was the son you actually never had or something like that.
Yeah, he's kind of my surrogate in a way because the way I created the character, I wrote and directed the movie and produced the TV series, but it all started with this idea that when I was a kid, I had these fantasies like kids do, like wouldn't it be great if I could blank, like wouldn't it be great if I could walk on the ceiling, or wouldn't it be great if I could fly to school? It'd be cool if I could have my own jetpack. I grew up during the '60s with all the moonshots, and I loved science and science fiction and rockets, and I just wanted to do that. And I thought, maybe I could be an astronaut. But it's like, no, I'm not quite smart enough, or not quite. So instead I went into filmmaking, and I created a character that kind of got to live out all the childhood fantasies that I had. Because I figured, like, well, if I'm going to have like a robot dog and a jetpack and a ship I can fly around in, I would have to be really, really smart. So I made this character a boy genius, and I got to live out sort of my fantasies through him. So he's a bit of a surrogate, I guess.
There you go. That's cool. So I asked this I know we'll come back around to that, but I asked this of everyone who comes on. We're all astronomers, that a lot of us that watch this. How did you get your start in astronomy and astrophotography?
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. I always had an interest, even when I was a kid, growing up. I was really young, growing up in Texas. My dad would take me hunting and fishing and expose me to the outdoors. I was a city kid in Dallas, and I got sort of addicted to the outdoors. And I remember the thing I liked most was looking up at the night sky and seeing all the stars, because we'd be in really dark places, out in the country, the hill country of Texas. And I always wanted to get like a telescope and check it out. I used to walk by a couple of observatories every day on my way to school. I remember there's one guy that had a big dome that he built on top of his house just in the neighborhood. And I used to walk by it and imagine, like, wow, what must the telescope look like in that place? And a funny anecdote to that is years and years later, I joined the Texas Astronomical Society in Dallas, and they've got a dark sky site up in Atoka, Oklahoma. And I volunteered to go up there and help work on the dome and kind of get introduced to the place. And as I was in the dome, uh, looking around, there was a plaque on the wall and a picture, and it turned out that that observatory, that dome, was the one I used to walk by at
Oh,
school
that's
every
wild.
day. And that years ago, the club had bought it or donated or whatever, and they moved it all the way from North Dallas to Atoka, Oklahoma. And finally, I was standing in the observatory I always used to walk by as a kid.
That's pretty wild. I do notice that there's kind of a trend like that when you talk to some people where there's just some funny little thing like that where it's like it comes full circle in some way,
Right.
shape, or form. Which I'm
Yeah.
sure in your career you've probably seen a lot of little, like you said, anecdotes like that where it's or antidotes, where you see something and then years later it somehow comes back around and kind of completes that circle again.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. But yeah, to answer your question, I never really owned a telescope until I kind of I went on sabbatical after Ant Bully came out, the last feature film that I've worked on others since then, but the last one that I wrote and directed came out then, and I had to take a break because after 20 years of the pedal down and working 7 days a week, I mean, production's a tough business. My wife and I needed a break. And so, because she was actually running the company, and
Mm.
it was nice because Kim could focus on managing the company, managing all the folks there, the crew, and then that freed up Keith and myself to focus on the creative part. But anyway, after years and years, we were ready for a break, and I thought, well, what would I like to do now? And it was serendipitous because right then I was in the bookstore and I came across magazines. I was looking around and I saw this, like, I can't remember if it's Sky and Tel or Astronomy magazine. I was flipping through and I see all these pictures in the back of amateur astronomers taking astrophotography. And I'd never even heard of that. And I thought, oh my God, that is so cool. I got to try that because I just bought a CPC 800 and it was my first telescope. And I thought, well, I got a camera. I'll stick it on there and see what I can get. And like most people, you shoot M42 and took it in there, loaded it into Photoshop, and started stretching it. And I went, oh my God. I was so blown away. I go, okay, I warned my wife. I go, all right, I'm going to get really into this. I'm just warning you.
Yeah.
And she was very understanding.
You know, I appreciate people who just go big or go home at that with that kind of mentality. So it's like you can't take it with you. You might as well just dive into it.
Yeah,
So
well, for me, it scratched a lot of itches because, like I said, I love the outdoors. I love photography, and I love science and astronomy. It captured all those scratched all those itches. And there's definitely an art aspect to it. When you've got the data, and then you're trying to process the data. That part gets into artistic expression and the way you compose the objects and compose the nebulae or whatever you're shooting. So yeah, it appealed to me on all fronts.
that's pretty cool, and I'm glad you're still part of the community there. I know you've made the move from Texas out here to further west into the Arizona desert at this point, and I think you've taken a little bit of a break from it. I'm not sure if you plan to jump back into astrophotography or not, or
Yeah,
if you have.
yeah, it's still part of my plan. Yeah, I had to. I ran an observatory in Texas. My parents had or they still have a ranch in Lampasas County, and so I built a observatory out there and ran it for a number of years. I go down there every new moon, and but then after about 5 years of having a walkabout, I thought, I'm not getting any younger. I better, if I'm going to get on the roller coaster one more time, I better get on now. So moved to LA, got on some indie projects and worked out there for, I guess 6 or 7 years. Then the last indie project ended, and I looked around, and my wife and I looked at each other and said, well, if I'm not working, I'm not going to stay in LA. It's expensive. Plus, I wanted to get out of the big cities and get someplace where I could see the night sky from my home. And so we didn't want to move back to Texas. I spent 50 years there. Loved it, but I'd like to go someplace different. We always liked sort of high desert, and we started looking around Tucson. And it was sort of a perfect fit for us. I love it here. I mean, I can see the Milky Way from my backyard, naked
Yeah,
eye. I hadn't been able to do that since I was a kid. So yeah, we love it, and because of that, yeah, most of my astrophotography now has been, doing Milky Way shots, night sky, night landscape stuff. I've got some ideas for some projects I want to start doing soon. I want to take advantage of the landscape here because it's like,
Hmm.
you come to some place like this where there's so much natural beauty with the mountains and the saguaro, just the way the desert looks. Going and having that be an element of your photos. So, night landscape stuff, but I want to do some HA black and white stuff with the night landscapes and do something a little different than I've done before.
No, and that's kind of the cool thing I'm sure you've seen with astrophotography. And we were talking just before we started this, even with like music and stuff, that even though there are kind of like rules and foundations to these things, they're not set in stone, if you will. It's just kind of a foundation to get started. And then you can kind of warp it to what your vision kind of is.
Right.
But it's something that doesn't have to take like on a film or something that you're working. It doesn't span a year or whatever. It's you can complete a project or work within it within a fairly reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, we were talking about that earlier, and most of my work in animation usually takes 4 or 5 years to do an animated feature. So it's 4 or 5 years out of your life. That's a long time, and until you get to a finished state and get that sort of satisfaction of like, oh, I've created this. But it takes you 4 or 5 years to have that feeling. Whereas with astrophotography, you can go out and if you got clear skies and a good weekend, you can go out and shoot a few targets and then process all next week and then come up with finished images within a few days. And it's so satisfying. And it didn't take 4 or 5 years. And the same thing with music. You could write, conceive a song, and record it all within a day or two. Then
Mm-hmm.
a sense of satisfaction. So yeah, those are all things that scratch that creative itch.
Yeah. We've had a few people on who have worked in the film industry here. It's kind of interesting to see how many actually a lot of them are sci-fi based, so that would make more sense
Yeah.
why they're into astronomy and astrophotography. Um, but one thing I've always been curious about when it comes to the world of Hollywood and film is obviously you've got a project, and in your case, you had this vision and you built it up. Um, but how does it has to, because my sister is actually a traveling she works in theater as a stage manager, and I know her world can be very chaotic to where it's like you're secure, you've got a job for a year to 5 years, and then once that is completed, it's kind of like I gotta find something else. So is that kind of how that world is? It's very kind of secure then chaos, then secure then chaos.
Yeah,
So
yeah, exactly right. It's very much feast or famine. Um, we were a little different in that we were a animation production company, and yeah, we would expand and contract as work would come in and out. But we did have this sort of great luck with timing of things. Things kind of happened in the right order, in the right timing, and our timing was perfect for 20 years. We weren't owned by anyone. We didn't have deep pockets. It was just my buddy and me that started my business DNA out of my apartment. Just the two of us. Then we expanded as we grew clients and got busier and busier and made the leap into digital. I mean, we started off traditional, hand painted cells and doing motion graphics like Chrome logos of the 80s, all that kind of stuff. But I had an early taste of computer. I worked on a IMI 500 running Wavefront software. This was back in '85, I think. Very early. It's a part of the system that they use on Tron. And so I got an early taste of doing 3D, but it was years until something came out that was affordable and capable enough to do animated character work in 3D. And so that's why in '95 did a little proof of concept called Johnny Quasar, which became Jimmy Neutron. And it was just an after hours project I did to see if I could do character animation in 3D running Lightwave software that used to be part of the video toaster. And then once we did that, that kind of started the whole Jimmy Neutron thing happening. Um, but yeah, we were always doing after hours stuff. Like my partner and I, we started our business because we were both filmmakers and we wanted to surround ourselves with the tools to do our own projects. And to pay for that, we had to call it a business and do other work for clients and make
Yes.
money to pay ourselves and stuff. And so that's kind of how it came about. We would, during the day, we would work for clients, and then at night or days where we were down, we would work on our own projects, and that's where Neutron came from. That's where a variety of other shorts we did came from.
Yeah, myself growing up, I know I'm gonna put myself in a completely different generation from you, but I grew up seeing Jimmy Neutron become a thing. I remember when it came out and the advertising for it, and then the movie was there, and then the show followed shortly after on Nickelodeon and stuff like that. So I remember a lot of those episodes with like Sheen and Carl and Jimmy and the whole crew over there. Now that I'm older and looking back on it, I appreciate kind of how you took a modern approach to this different, science kind of based, but you really took kind of that Buck Rogers 1950s style and kind of brought it into, the early 2000s and such at the time. So it's like a different generation kind of got to taste that vintage space feel in a way.
Yeah. Right. I mean, because, growing up, like I said, a lot of the pulps and stuff and that sort of mid-century design informed a lot of the things I liked about, conceiving space travel. That's sort of in the golden era of it. And I just thought, and also what fun if you're going to build this universe of these characters. I like the timeless aspect of it because clearly there's modern technology and this could be current day, but everything looks like it's the 50s or mid-century. Yeah. And I kind of like that combo. It kind of gave it a timeless sense about it. And then also the idea that, okay, we're going to have the internet, but what would the internet look like if it was in the 50s? What would computers look like then? What would the web pages or whatever? And it was just a fun way to approach it.
Now, when you started creating the movie itself, was there plans for Nickelodeon to pick that up as a show after the movie had aired and everything, or did that kind of expand off of the capabilities of the movie?
Yeah, so the way it went down was that I did this little proof of concept that I mentioned in '95, and it was just like a little minute long thing where back then he was named Johnny Quasar, but Johnny flew up in his rocket. Goddard, the robot dog, was in the seat behind him. He's flying through space. He flies up to the camera, introduces himself, and then, oh my gosh, dodges some asteroids and flies away. It's just like a really quick thing. But I showed that to Nickelodeon, and I by this time I had written a show Bible too that described what the show would be, what the other characters would be, some example storylines, and they flipped on it. They said, "Oh, we love it. This is perfect. We're looking for something like this, and we definitely want to do it." So we thought, "Hooray! We're going to be a hit. Whatever, we're successful." Well, then it took years for them to, drop the contract, blah, blah, blah. So it took about 3 years before they finally pulled the trigger on doing a pilot. And so in '98, did the pilot, which was about I think is 12-minute pilot, something like that. And the story that I wrote for the pilot was basically the story that became the movie. But I showed the pilot to Nickelodeon, once it's finished, and that's when everything went crazy. Like all the heads of Nickelodeon at the time flew to Dallas, said, "We love this thing. How did you do this? This is amazing." Because back then, 3D was pretty new, and the studios, the networks didn't really understand how 3D worked. But they were so blown away. They said, "Hey, I pitched this as a TV series idea," where they said, "Yeah, we definitely want a series, but we also want a feature film." And as soon as they said that, I thought, well, what would be great from a production standpoint is to do the feature film first, because you could build the whole universe at like a feature quality level. Because 3D is like digital assets. It's kind of like a digital backlot that you can keep reusing and revisiting. And so they understood that idea, but then they said, well, that's great, but we're used to doing it the other way, where we have a series that we can build an audience with our network, and then lead up to a movie. So this would be the reverse of that, but they understood what I was getting at. So then they countered and said, how about this? Why don't we do a series of shorts on our network, interstitials, that would show in between programming, building up to the movie, and then we'll spin the movie into series using the feature assets, and that's a perfect. So, and that's what we wound up doing.
I think it's interesting how you guys did it, because when you guys came in, it seemed like that was a major time shift for them, to where you kind of had, and I know there's probably people in the audience who don't pay attention to this because I grew up with this, and some of you are beyond that, but you had like Rugrats and stuff like that were already airing, and I think they were kind of still heavy in their life, but they're and then you guys came in and you were like this new era where you had Jimmy Neutron and like Hey Arnold was coming in, and or maybe that was going already, and then Wild Thornberries and SpongeBob, all that was coming in to where. But one thing I've always found interesting regardless, and one thing that's always kind of stuck with me, because you just kind of explained how they kind of flipped it around. You always see, and maybe you could elaborate a little bit on this. We'll get back to astronomy in a bit, but you see these shows and they do seasons and seasons of the show, and then they come out with a movie, whether it's a feature film or it's on, just, I'm not sure how you would call it if it's just on TV. But it seems like they do a show and it leads up to a movie, and it's almost like the movie ends up killing the whole thing. It's like it all leads up to this, and then once the movie comes out, the series is like done. And I don't know if that's planned or that just loses steam and momentum, where yours was the inverse of that, to where It's kind of like, you had this smooth sailing because you introduced the universe, you didn't just end it. And I've seen a lot of kids series that seem to just die after they actually make a movie.
Yeah, it was kind of like a last gasp.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if that's purposefully, if they just actually lose steam after that happens.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, but in our case, it was really fascinating. Nickelodeon back then, they were really tops in terms of marketing and their ideas. And Albie Hecht, who was in charge of, he was the producer in charge of the project from Nickelodeon, and he was great. I mean, you hear a lot of like Hollywood stories about, bad, evil executives and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, there are definitely a few, but there's some really good folks out there, and Albie was one of them. And he was instrumental in championing the project and understanding what we were trying to do. I mean, he kind of looked at us like, you guys are like a garage band, but with animation. I said, yes, that's exactly a great analogy. Because our offices back then, we were fairly small. We had 15 people. And he asked, hey, can you make the movie with all this you have here? Like, no, we're going to have to hire about 100 people. We're going to have to build a facility. And he goes, okay. So then Paramount is the other side of the coin, because Nickelodeon and Paramount had a deal together where Paramount would distribute their films. So, of course, Paramount weighs in. And, of course, they want us to make it in California and all move out there. And said, well, you're gonna have to buy all of my employees' houses, move us out there. I gave them all these financial reasons why, hey, just let us stay here and build from where we're at rather than starting completely over again. And they finally said, okay. And it worked so well. The great testament is the studio never came out to Dallas to check on us. They liked everything they saw. We delivered everything on time. We never gave them a reason to come out and kind of bird dog us. And so it was a nice buffer, I got to say, being in Dallas doing the work. And I would fly back and forth to LA, but LA and Hollywood was out there. We were in our little creative cocoon in Dallas. And so it was a great relationship.
That's awesome. I'm glad it worked out and you've profited well from that, and you have the life that you've got now.
Yeah. So. I never knew that I could make money doing animation. I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. And then through the course of the years, we figured out a way to make money with it and had greater success than I ever thought we would. Again, it was very, very exciting and very satisfying. my wife and I used to joke, we feel like the Beverly Hillbillies because we would go to LA for these, Tom Hanks dinner parties, and we went to the Oscars because of the nomination, and we have to pinch ourselves. We're looking around, rubbing shoulders with all these celebrities and stuff, and we would just laugh because we felt like we were such Beverly Hillbillies. Like
Yeah.
we were, hey, look at them! Wow,
Yeah, I'm from Texas. So I know there's the creativity side of things, and that applies to astronomy and astrophotography. And I'm sure there's a lot of people, myself included, that as much as we love astronomy, you almost need to kind of clean the slate a little bit. And I know we talked about this a little bit with music. And what is your thought as someone who's, done film and music and astrophotography and photography? Do you find the ability to switch gears between certain arts cleansing to where it kind of gives you inspiration that floods over into another aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, for me, you get a little burned out if you're doing the one, type of thing for so long that when I was in production with film, it was nice to be able to go back and forth between writing and directing because they're very different. And, as a writer, I want to see my characters, say certain things, or it's dialogue, and you're structuring the whole thing. But then as a director, I want certain things as a director, and sometimes it makes you're at odds with yourself a little bit. But what's great is that if you're directing crews of hundreds of people sometimes, and after doing that every day, and in your daily sessions and your approval sessions, everything. After a while, it's nice to step out of that huge group and into the solitary act of writing. And so then when I was on a writing jaunt, I may be home or coming into the office very infrequently because I got to focus on the writing, and it's so solitary. So being able to go back and forth between like a group situation and a very solitary situation is also really helpful, so you don't kind of burn out in any one area. And then in the early days when Keith and I, my DNA partner, we would do music after hours because we were doing music at DNA. We did both music and animation until the animation totally eclipsed what we were doing with music. But music was a great outlet because, as we were talking about earlier, films can take years to make a film, like a feature film, take 4 or 5 years, but you could conceive, write, record, and come up with a song within a couple of days sometimes. And then you get that wonderful sense of accomplishment that you don't always get with film for years. So yeah, it's kind of nice to have, long-term, things, and then short-term things.
Yeah, it keeps it fresh on the mind and kind of gives you a reset. I know that's how I approach music as well, or sometimes like with some of the stuff that I play, it's you look at like an object like a nebula or something like that, and for me at least, it's like, okay, I want something that's kind of inspired by this, and then you kind of go for the sound of, I want to have this rhythm and flow that kind of gives you this sense of nebulosity in a way. So it's like you can kind of paint a picture in a variety of different capabilities at that point.
Yeah.
So
You can take inspiration from pretty much anything that sparks your excitement or your curiosity.
Do you find, let me rephrase that because I don't want to just stick on, film stuff on this one, but what is something for you that's, when you go out and do astronomy, whether you're doing astrophotography or full heart imaging, is there something that's refreshing for you, even just going out in the backyard and just looking up? Because I know for me, people have asked me a number of times. Actually, my fiance asked me the other day, because we're going to Grand Canyon Star Party tomorrow, like, what's your favorite thing about Grand Canyon? And I kind of had to think about it a little bit. And there's a lot of different aspects. And I've had to think about this a lot with astronomy as well, where it's like, I've got big Dobbs, I've got big refractors, you've got all this gear. But to me, it's kind of, as I've gotten older, there's something about the fact that just sitting out there and looking up, no telescopes, just being like, that's the Milky Way. That's a sky full of stars, and we're away from the noise and the chaos. And I lived in LA for 5 years too. So there's something when you step away, especially everything that's going on in the world right now, there's something kind of, it's like a hard reset that just clears everything. So I didn't know if that's something that you appreciate when you go out in the backyard now, or.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've always appreciated about it. It was always a draw for me. And I rail all the time about observation. To my wife, it's people, they don't observe anymore.
Yep.
There's so many things you can discover just in your backyard if you just sit and observe and just watch. And I guess I learned that growing up with my dad hunting and fishing, where there's lots of waiting and watching and. But yeah, I think observation is sort of a lost art in a way, because we have so many distractions. We have computers and podcasts and all these distractions. But you go outside and look up, and you can see things that you didn't even know you could see. Like, that's what going to the star parties, it was magic. Particularly those first few years I went, where I used to go to the Texas Star Party, Fort Davis every year, and also the Okie-Tex Star Party in Black Mesa in the Oklahoma Panhandle. And they were both awesome. And in both parties, I would see things on good nights where we had good transparency, and of course, in a really dark area. I remember at Black Mesa, I saw this white patch. It looked like a piece of the Milky Way had broken off. It was just sitting there. And I go, well, it's not a cloud, because the cloud would be black. It's like there's no light here. And I asked this guy, what is that? He goes, oh, that's the Gegenschein. That's the best I've ever seen it. I go, the Gegenschein? What the hell's the Gegenschein?
Yeah.
But so that's an example. If you just sit and observe in a really dark place, you'll see amazing things you've never heard of. And like, I remember being hit like an epiphany at the Texas Star Party one year. The Milky Way had risen, and it was just so bright, and the air was so transparent that your eyes are good and dark adapted. You can sit there and wave your hand and see the shadow on the ground from starlight. And that's the only thing that's the only thing that's creating light to create that shadow. And it just kind of hits you like, I didn't know that was possible, that you could see the shadow from the Milky Way,
No, and that's something I've learned from a lot of my friends are much older than I am. I guess that just comes with the state of astronomy. There's not a lot of people my age there's kids now younger than me, so I'm moving up those ranks there at this point. But in the times of astrophotography and social media, everything's so, quick and fast, and little 10-second blurbs of, people, doing whatever they're doing. And that's something I've learned over the years, where like I've seen the Ring Nebula a ton of times, and there's something different when, and even doing outreach events, you go out and you show someone a bright object like the Ring Nebula or M13, they look and they're like, wow, that little fuzzy thing. And it's like, well, yeah, but put your eye back in the eyepiece, like give yourself a minute, like adapt to the dark and just take it in for a minute. And, going to Grand Canyon tomorrow, which is an outreach event, that's a big thing of what I like is I think the underlying tone that I like about astronomy is it teaches you not only to just be humble about things, because it shows you where our place in the universe actually is and how fragile it all actually is, which is probably a big quote from, Contact at that point. But it gets you to slow down and just appreciate things, because so many people just go in and, like you said, there's very few people now who actually observe anything. It's like, I was told this, I read this, I saw this, I read the headline. It's like, you didn't read anything, you just read a headline. And there's something interesting to be like, put your eye back in there, relax, take a minute, like let your eye adapt and adjust. And it's like that little smudge isn't a smudge when you actually look, it becomes stars. And the bigger the telescope, the even more intense that becomes. But it really kind of is like, oh, it's kind of like stop and smell the roses occasionally, just from the astronomy sense. But I'm sure even from your perspective from working in Hollywood, that there's so many people who just don't stop, and then it's done, and your flash and everything's finished, and you didn't stop and just appreciate where you were in that point. So
Yeah. Right. Well, and that's kind of the life we live now. Everything's very fast paced. Everything changes, and then you start to sound like an old person, like things are moving so fast.
yeah,
But it really is a reaction to again the power of slowing down to observe and see things that like. Again, I at the risk of sounding like an old person now, I guess I'm getting older, but I enjoy sitting out on my deck and watching the birds come to water in our pool. In fact, we get all these crazy species, and they're fun to observe and watch and kind of learn their calls. And I've never been a birder, but I know that's also an aspect of astronomy. A lot of people are into both, and now I can kind of see the allure of it because I've started to get a real kick out of watching how these birds behave and just behavior stuff. It's just fascinating. It's like watching. I tell my wife, it's like watching TV out here. Yeah, I'm just watching the covey of quails are back with their little 12 young, and they take turns, the parents playing lookout, and now they're coming to water, and they pop up one. It's like a little cartoon.
yeah. It'd be a good one with just a cartoon of a whole little family of quails talking about like the drama that unfolds during a typical day as a quail. It's like, we've gotten a fight with a roadrunner today, and blah 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 blah, and the hawk is back. So it's like, so I know you're a photographer, and photography is a very interesting thing because you hear people like, oh, well, you have an eye for it. It's like, well, yeah. And you brought this up very briefly earlier, and it kind of makes me think about some of the Star Wars movies, and it just slipped my mind. It's one of the newer ones, Rogue One.
Yeah.
And there's a point to this, I promise. But you were saying earlier how astrophotography, you can approach it by framing an object differently, and I feel like in astrophotography that we get stuck a lot because you see people are like, you want to see my picture of M42 or M31, and sure, it looks nice, but it's like after a while the framing is the same thing, where you can take a different approach to it. And what I mean by Rogue One and Star Wars is the movie Rogue One is literally based upon one line in the first Star Wars, where it's like, we lost many lives to get these plants. They built a whole freaking movie off of that sentence.
Right.
And something like photography is like that, where in astrophotography we get kind of backlogged, and where it's like, oh, M42 telescope slews over, does its thing, take hours of exposure, blah 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 blah. But sometimes you need to take a step back and be like, okay, I've heard this a million times, or I've looked at this a million times. How can I frame that differently? And I think one person you and I both know who do that exceedingly well is Rogelio
Right.
Bernardo. He calls them, I think, starscapes, and I've seen your images too, where you follow kind of that same path where you rotate it differently or what have you. But the nice thing about going back to your comments about observing is, because you've taken the time to observe and maybe study a star field, you're not just, I'm going to image this. You have knowledge of the framework around the object as well. So that way you can approach it from a different angle and make it more interesting.
Right. Well, it kind of, I always looked at it like landscape photography. It's landscape, but it's spacescapes, and I guess that plays into what you're saying. Rogelio term he uses. Yeah, same thing. Is as a photographer, it's like, okay, here is a subject. How do I want to frame this subject in an interesting way? And you're right. If you're just slewing and making every target dead center, as a photographer, I would find that to me kind of boring, because the photography me wants to present it differently than I've seen it before. Oh, or you can sometimes rotate it because there's no rules. You can rotate it, frame it this way, because that's different than the way most people display it. But when you do that, you start to notice different things. And And I think that's what's cool about it too, is that it looks a little fresher when you present it a little more, different. But yeah, I would plan. I did a lot of wide field mosaics, and so because of that, I have to plan pretty carefully my fields. But I'd always look first at what the overall composition is going to be. What am I trying to accomplish, and then come up with a field scenario that makes sense for the session. But yeah, so that I'd like to. In fact, I used to for a while I'd give little presentations and stuff, and I talked about that. Planning your session, thinking about composition. And there's no right or wrong. A lot of people are into strictly technical science. I just want to capture the object and see details, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong. But for me, I always looked at what can I do more artistically with it, and that became part of the fun for me.
Well, and you mentioned something earlier where you kind of wanted to go back to black and white work.
Yeah.
That's what I started doing, and then I got into color and started to learn more of the tricks and ins and outs and stuff like that of astrophotography, and that's all well and good. But to me, and maybe you could chime in on this too, I really like going back and looking at, like E.E. Barnard's, books and stuff like that, where it was glass plates, and there was kind of a romance in that time of astronomy where it's the early 1900s. There's a lot of crazy theories and stuff going on, but we're photographing the sky with glass plates. It's all black and white. To me, there's something very cool about just erasing the color and the high saturation and stuff, and you just go back to the elegance of hydrogen alpha and the nebulosity flowing through the stars, and it's like there's something very elegant about just looking at the structures that are there rather than sometimes I find, and maybe you could, as a filmmaker, you could probably go back on this to black and white films. There's something, when you strip color away from things, there's something that just, you get to the very basics of what an object is and what you're seeing rather than the chaos that color throws into it. So.
Right. And it depends on the subject. Like some subjects, it's all about the color. I mean,
all of
the interest is in the colors in that subject. And so then you want to capture those. But in other objects, it has color, but I wouldn't say the color is the most important part. It's the structure that makes it interesting. So at that point, you might decide, you know what, I'll do a black and white of it, because rather than distract with this minimal amount of color that's not really the more focal point, do it as a black and white and just focus on the structures and really bring those out. And so again, there's not a right or wrong. It's just kind of case by case. What is the image you want to present? And what do you think is going to make the best presentation? And sometimes it's black and white, I think.
Yeah.
Same thing with just terrestrial, landscape photography or any kind of photography. And the other nice thing about black and white, like black and white movies, I know it's kind of funny because some people kind of turn their nose up at black and white movies, like, oh, it's black and white. Black and white films, some of them are some of my favorite films. For one thing, black and white gives the presentation an automatic, almost fantasy aspect to it, because it's not the real world. We don't live in a black and white world. We live in a world full of color. To enter a black and white world feels like you've entered a special place, and to me, that can be really help transport you. So certain black and white films, I can't imagine being in color. And
if they ever remake, like, was it Some Like It Hot?
Yeah,
that's
right.
You're gonna screw that whole movie up altogether.
I'm a big David Lynch fan, and I remember when first time I saw Eraserhead at a midnight movie back in the 70s, and I was blown away by it. And that's it. It works on so many levels, visually, and the way he handled audio and sound design in it. But I can't imagine a movie like that in color. It would just completely be a different experience.
Or even like the birds. I feel like the birds' color would be. It would shift the whole thing completely. There's almost something that's more terrifying because it's in black and white, rather than
the birds is in color. So
was
you're talking about, Hitchcock's The Birds.
Yeah, I
Psycho
lost
was
that.
black and white. Psycho.
There you go.
Yeah, you're probably thinking Psycho. Yeah, Psycho in color. Yeah, it would be a Brian De Palma film. Basically.
Yeah. It would be interesting to know, like, if Jaws was in black and white, like how much of a spin that would have thrown on things.
Yeah.
But that's the cool thing about astrophotography. There's so many images that I've taken where I'm not happy with the way the color's looking, the saturation's just not hitting, and you take that saturation bar and just throw it to 0.
Yeah.
It's like, you know what? That looks pretty cool. And I think there's a lot of people that are almost, I feel like there's a lot of people out there, maybe you're watching, that just throw out a perfectly good image because you're not happy with the color. Sometimes just stop, take the saturation and move that to 0 and go black and white and see how it might pop. So
yeah, it's called editing.
Yes.
Same thing with film. That's an early lesson I learned in film school, is that you're working. You conceive this thing. You go, okay, in my mind's eye, this is what I want to create, and then you set about doing it, and then you have all these pieces that then you're putting together, and then like one of them doesn't fit. And you go, you're wrestling with yourself trying to make this fit. And then suddenly the light goes on and you go, hey, I don't have to include this. Even though I planned it and shot it, if I pull it out, it's better.
Yeah.
And the same is true when you're processing images. Sometimes you have this goal, but then once you start working with the data, you realize, you know what, it's better if I don't include that, or if I do that differently, because it's just a better image.
If any of you are interested in like outtake scenes, if you go on YouTube and find the alternate ending to James Cameron's Titanic, where they actually run up and find Rose on the back and she still has the diamond, and they see the diamond and he wants to hold it, and if they had put that in there, would have ruined the entire movie altogether. It's just like, that would have 3 hours of my life would have just been torn away because she had the freaking diamond the whole time, which we all know she did. But it's stuff like that where it's just, it just wraps that better. Sometimes things just need to have a little tiny knot at the end of it, and that's it, where but the rest of the world doesn't know. And sometimes that's just the way the story needs to be told at that point.
Right.
And you could apply that to your image too, where I am sure, even going back to your films, Ant Bully and Jimmy Neutron and all the indies that you've done, there are countless frames that were left on the floor and scrapped that would have shifted everything. So
yeah, some of my favorite scenes I willingly cut and left on the cutting room floor, because what you quickly learn is that you have to take a step back and see the whole picture. That was one of the things I learned as a director early on, is that you have to be the macro guy. You have to, of course, pay attention to all the details, but be able to step back. And what happens is that, like, there's a couple scenes I created in Ant Bully that were some of my favorite sequences. They're fantastic, but then when you see the whole film play as a whole, you realize, oh my gosh, story-wise, it's starting to drag here, because we need to get to the next plot point quicker, because the audience is going to get restless, and so then you have to make the tough decision. You know what? Even though I love the sequence, if I cut it out, the movie plays better, because we're getting to that next plot point. And the same thing when you're processing your images. If you're rather than fighting something, trying to force it, if it's not there, just abandon it. Don't try to keep, or go out and get a whole lot more data.
So we've got 10 minutes left. There's a couple questions. If you guys have questions for John, now would be the time to do it. But one of them, where'd it go? Have you done any live action films in your career?
I only did live action in my student film days, and also in my after hours, like music videos and things I did. I wanted to get into live action. In fact, mainly because, I understood it. I started off doing live action in school. I would combine it with animation, but I forgot what I was going to say now. My mind went. I started regressing too much. What were you talking about?
Live action films. We're doing it.
Yeah. So after Ant Bully came out, my next project at Warner Brothers was going to be an adaptation of Robert Heinlein's The Star Beast, which I adapted, wrote the script for Warner Brothers. They loved the script. I was extremely happy with it. But then what happens at studios, they had a couple of G-rated family science fiction films that bombed. And so suddenly it was, project, abandoned, because, oh, well, they wanted to make it darker, and make it dark. It's like, well, it wasn't a dark story. That's not where I wanted to go with it. But it was going to be a live action, and I was excited to do it. It was live action with the main character being animated in it. But yeah, I was really excited to do that. Never happened, unfortunately. But so the answer, it's a long way of saying no. I haven't really done any live action films or series.
Well, maybe one day, but I know right now you're enjoying just not being in the crazy chaos of
Yeah,
it. Anyway,
I gotta say, I'm enjoying working on my personal projects now.
is there anybody that you've worked with in your, career that was you were excited to work with them and they were actually like a joy to work with?
Yeah, well, off the top of my head, Patrick Stewart, he was the voice of the alien king in Neutron in the movie. He was a joy to work with because, I came in, I was a first time director. I was like super nervous. I'm having to direct these celebrities, and stuff. Patrick Stewart came in. We, met, greeted me. He said, John, I just want to make you happy. I just want to give you what you need for the film. So feel free to direct me any way you want. You can give me line reads. That's totally fine. I just want to make you happy. I was like, wow, what a super nice guy. And he would leave voicemail messages on my home phone and stuff. And yeah, he's just a like really nice guy. And Nick Cage was somebody I got to direct, and he was a guy, one of my favorite actors, and he was such a joy to work with, mainly because he was so into it. I mean, he's a method actor, and he played this ant. It was this wizard ant, and so he hated the humans for what they've done to their, stomping on their nests and everything. And he would work himself up into such a frenzy before each take. He'd be like pacing back and forth. These humans, they've been kicking and stomping for years and decades. And then he'd tear into his line, and then he wouldn't want to wait for anything. He was like, direction, go again, no slates.
Yeah.
And he was so demanding, but it was so fun because he was so into it. And so I had a lot of nice experience. I got to direct Jonathan Winters, and I don't know if you know who Jonathan Winters is, but he was sort of he's a famous improv comic that was very, very popular in the 60s, 70s, a lot of films. Anyway, one of my heroes. And he was so schizophrenic, like you never knew who you were talking to because he was constantly going in and out of character, like all the time. And so he was a hoot. I mean, and what was funny is that after our session, he went out into the hallway, and Gary Owens from Laugh-In, who was a friend of his, another comic guy, he had just finished up a session across the hall, and they immediately went into an improv, like right in the hallway. Jonathan Winters goes up to him and says, "Hey Gary, I'm Rocket Fist Johnson's. I just won my first, heavyweight bout. Interview me." "Yeah, Mr. Johnson, congratulations." And they went on for like 15 minutes, and the crowds of people would start crowding. So there's like some really great, Hollywood stories, and working with some of these celebs, and of course I worked with some that just were not great.
Yeah, where they expected all the M&Ms to be green, and it's
yeah, and a lot of it when it didn't go well, it was usually because they were afraid, because you realize pretty quick that some of these celebs, they're more afraid of you than you are of them, in a way, because there's a lot of insecurity, and I can understand that they're putting their face in front of the camera all the time. But yeah, usually when they get scared, it doesn't go well, and and part of your job is to make them comfortable, so they can do their best work and not worry about how they're sounding or whatever. So
sure. Last question here. What are some of the personal projects you're working on now, if you even want to elaborate on that?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, one is that I have a lot of interests. One of my interests, I collect a lot of vintage science fiction art. Pretty large collection, mainly from the 50s, 60s, some 70s. There's an artist named Paul Lair, a great science fiction artist. He did thousands of covers back in the 60s, 70s mainly. And the estate reached out to me, and we're doing a documentary on his life and work that we're in the early stages of. And so we've been working on that for a little bit on the creative. It'll be a very interesting documentary. So since he was a science fiction artist, we're taking kind of a science fiction approach to the doc. So that's something that working on. Also been doing a lot of music. Got back into music in a big way. I had a band in high school and college, and of course we all went our separate ways after college, and families and work and everything. So now we're at the age where we're starting to have free time again. And we kind of got the band back together a few years ago and recorded an album of our songs that we wrote in college because we didn't have
wild.
We didn't have a document of it. And so we recorded it in Seattle. We had such a great time doing it. It was like, oh man, we got to write more music. We haven't written anything together in 40 years. And so we spent the last 4 or 5 years writing all new material, and we're in the middle of recording our next album. We've recorded a little more than half. We're going back to the studio again in the fall to finish it. And that's just been a hoot. It's been so much fun because I've always played guitar kind of off and on. But when you're in a band and you've got a goal and you're trying to record an album and it focuses you. So I've gotten back into playing. I've had to improve my chops a lot. And that's been really fun. It's always fun to see yourself get better, doing something. And whether it's astrophotography or playing your guitar or whatever, it's just iterations. The more you do it, the better you get. And then suddenly one day you step back and you go, wow, I did that. And that's not half bad, very satisfying.
I do find that we kind of undersell ourselves a lot, where it's just like, hey, I'm a lot better at this than I thought I was. And, maybe you're not, Jimi Hendrix or something or, whoever. But a lot of people, I think, need to give themselves a little bit more credit for what they do. So. Yeah.
I mean, just in my case, it's like I want to be just good enough to express myself, in a way that's satisfying, and that, hey, there's always going to be people much better than you. There's going to be people worse than you. And you fit in there somewhere, and just perform to the best of your ability. Again, whether it's, processing images or playing guitar or, otherwise, if you start beating yourself too much or looking at comparing your work to somebody else, you go, oh my gosh, they're so much better than me. I don't want to do it anymore. It's like, well, you're denying yourself the capacity to get better and have that sense of satisfaction. So you don't want to self-censor too much.
No, I've had that. I like to have my hands in a lot of different things just because I think I run rampant if my mind's not busy. So I'm sure you get this too, where people are like, wow, you're really talented. It's like, I don't really feel like I'm super talented. It's just I have a lot of interest and I just sink into it, and this is just what comes from it. Like, I think I could be way better at guitar or astrophotography. I could be way better at that. But you kind of see how many people in the world are, I don't know how I would put it, where, again, they kind of undersell themselves enough to where it's like, well, I'll never be able to do that. Why? Like, like learning guitar. It's like, it's never been easier to do it. You could go get, a $100 guitar from Amazon and a little tiny amp like this, little Spark thing I've got, and go on YouTube and start messing with it. Or if you want to get into astronomy, it's like, well, my telescope's not as big as yours or whatever. It's like, who cares? You're out here and you're enjoying it, and that's all that matters is that you're enjoying it. So
and you're learning. You're learning something. I mean, every time you learn something, you're making yourself better.
Yeah.
And so it's important. It's important to me to keep learning and doing things. That's why I never feared retirement because now I've got more time to learn more stuff that I didn't. I used to would just be learning a certain thing that was helping me in my work, but now I can branch out and try different things.
You open up the bandwidth a little bit more. So
yeah, right, exactly.
Well, that was an hour right there. So,
You're welcome.
But John, thank you very much for hanging out with us this morning. Always good to talk to you, and I'll have to hang out with you more because you're literally like 2 hours away. But yeah, if you guys have any do you still have a website, or did that go away, or?
The DNA website, yeah, it's still in fragments now. We don't keep up with it.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
If you guys ever have any questions for John, you can just put them down in the chat, and we can spring them over to him on that if you have any questions on that. Other than that, I think that's it. It's a dark weekend. We have 2 dark weekends in a row, actually. So hopefully you guys can get out and take a look at the Milky Way. It's coming up, close to about midnight. And yeah, if you're going to be at the Grand Canyon, stop by, say hi. But John, thank you very much. It was awesome talking to you. So.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Of course. All right, guys, that's pretty much it for this week. Again, next week will be pre-recorded, so we'll see you in 2 weeks. Live, we'll be talking about Dobsonians and how to pick them and going from small to really big ones. And other than that, please have a safe weekend. Get out to some dark, clear skies, and we will see you guys soon. Thank you very much. Thanks again, John.
All right, thank you.
See ya. Bye, guys.